Private equity is taking the U.S. accounting industry by storm. Since 2011, the UK allows law firms to take private capital with the ABS structure. Well, today Howard and I are pleased to speak with and welcome a former UK regulator and now law firm consultant advising corporate law firms in both the US and the UK on strategy and alternative business structures. Enjoy the episode. So welcome, Crispin, to the Future is Bright podcast. It's great to have you on the show today.
Great to be here with you, Chris.
Crispin, why don't you take a minute and share a little bit of your journey and your history and what you're up to today?
I work in the legal market. I've worked in the legal industry in the UK and the US over a long period of time. In the UK for more than 30 years. I'm not an attorney there. I'm not a lawyer. Never have been. But I was a regulator for 10 years. So I got a good insight into the liberalizations that happened in the UK. Deeply involved in those ABSs in the UK, and over the last 6-7 years I've worked substantially in the US, helping courts think about liberalization, particularly Arizona, and increasingly helping businesses that are looking to take advantage of a changing regulatory environment, be they legal businesses, law firms, investors, technology businesses, consulting businesses, the whole range really.
And where do you think we are in that journey currently in the U.S., and particularly in the U.S. first?
It's a revolution. It's just revolutions take a long time. They don't happen overnight, despite what we tend to think. The Industrial Revolution was 50, 60, 70 years, and it did change the world, but it did take time. So we're at the start of that journey in the legal industry. But everybody experiences it differently. So if you're in a traditional law firm, if you're a traditional lawyer, and you're carrying on doing the same sort of work and being successful, then it doesn't feel like much is changing. But if you're in a technology business or an alternative provider, a consulting business, and you're at the cutting edge of some of that change, then it feels much more radical. So I think the viewpoint you have in this ecosystem, in this legal market, really determines how you see where we are on that journey.
So it's not glacial.
Sometimes it feels like it, doesn't it? We're all impatient, and if you're a individual that can't get access to a lawyer, if you're a small business or a startup that is horrified at the fees that you're being quoted in your first fundraise, or if you're a corporate client under massive pressure to reduce costs, the change and the absence of innovation really does feel glacial. But scratch away at it, and there are opportunities to do things differently, and lots of people are taking them.
So because of your amazing experience on, obviously working in the UK, is it following the kind of the normal trajectory of the UK liberalization that has happened there?
That's a great question. It's a different context. The regulatory system that we started with in the UK was already much, much more liberalised than the US system. We don't have a unauthorised practice of law regime. We only have a list of 6 activities that are reserved to lawyers and regulated firms. So we already had an innovative, thriving, alternative market, technology market. Lots of US businesses that struggle to practice law because of the regime in the US are over here doing a fine job and have been for a long time. So ABS landed in a different environment. Some of that makes it happen faster because there's already innovators. Some of it is less necessary because you don't need an ABS to do lots of this work. You don't even need a law firm. You don't even need to be an attorney. You can write a will, anybody can do that. Mergers and acquisitions advice, anybody can do that. So it's a different environment. But still, I think there's common themes across both sides of the Atlantic. Personal injury is an attractive area for investment. But also, I would say all parts of the market are touched, and perhaps we'll talk about that a bit more over the next short period. There's not really any bit of the legal market that isn't touched in the UK, and I don't think will be touched in the US over the coming years.
Is it just harder in the US compared to the UK?
Oh yeah, definitely. Private equity is welcomed by the regulator. You don't get that many articles anymore saying the world is ending and the dangerous people are entering and lawyers' ethics are at risk. I think we're long, long past that discussion in the UK. And I don't even think most people notice whether a law firm has non-lawyer investors, non-lawyer directors, any of that. It's not a strong factor for regulators. I doubt consumers have even ever thought of such a thing, corporate or individual consumers. Don't think they really care who owns the businesses that serve them. They care about pricing, quality, accessibility, innovation.
Because when I was in the UK, my time, it's just the world was going to end when the ABS was kind of under consideration, and it was all going to go horribly wrong. And here we are. Was it 15, 20 years later? It's been quite an amazing kind of success if you kind of stand back and look at it in a very wide perspective in the UK.
Yeah, it's still an interesting debate in the UK. People say, well, it hasn't changed anything. Well, it wasn't designed to force people to change. If you thought that the best way to practice law and the best way to run your business was the same as 150 years ago, despite the fact that clients have changed, well, good luck. Um, and, as an old friend once said, it's hard to tell a room full of millionaires that their business model is broken. Uh, but there's plenty of opportunities to do things differently. The old style legal industry doesn't meet the needs of a whole bunch of people, individuals, small
Yeah.
business, big business, and that creates an opportunity for new entrants. That's how competition works. That's how our markets work. That's great. But if you really think you've got a strong business without making those changes, well, good. You can save money and not have to invest in technology and change and take all of those risks, and great. But that doesn't mean other people shouldn't be able to do it.
So, what I hear you saying is the old law firm business model in the UK was aging out, and there were new emerging ways to meet clients' needs, and the UK saw an opportunity, or the opportunity came to them where they were asking for this private capital and ABS structure. How did that evolve in the UK originally?
It actually started with our competition authorities 25 years ago, producing a report called Competition in the Professions. And it looked across a whole range of professional services and said there wasn't enough competition and that professional control of entry, standards, rule books was in the way of the dynamism that was needed. And professional services are a huge export for the UK. It's a real
Yeah.
strength. And you've got to keep innovating to make that sustainable. So, that led to the changes, and I think UK legal industry has gone from strength to strength, both homegrown businesses and welcoming foreign direct investment as well, which is, despite current debates about free trade, is still a really good way forward.
Super helpful. And so you're being pulled into the US for what with changes that are coming. Obviously, Arizona has been the most experimenting in this. Um, would love to hear your thoughts on even on other states. I know that there's been talk. I think the District of Columbia, DC market has some liberalization, and then there's other sandbox states. What are you seeing in those trends?
Yeah, I've spoken to a lot of those states and helped several of them think about reform. Some of them just come up against the power of the lawyer monopoly,
Hmm.
um, the control of the rule book by lawyers, uh, the control of market participants as to who else gets to participate doesn't exactly encourage change.
Yeah.
So we've seen reform in places like Florida and California really well developed and really well articulated, and then crash and burn against the existing providers and existing monopoly. But I think we've seen courts in particular starting to really think about two drivers. One is access to justice, so people not being able to get the legal services they need. Everyone starts by thinking that's just about the least empowered, the most disenfranchised citizens in our communities. But actually, that analysis applies to startups and small businesses, and it applies to big businesses as well. Wherever you sit in the market, you're not getting served in the way you as a customer want. And courts are noticing that and are thinking, well, what can we do? They're also noticing part two, I guess, what's happening in Arizona and that is being successful. People call it the Arizona experiment. I can hear the Chief Justice of Arizona in my ear even saying those words, saying this is no experiment, we're doing this. Um, but people are watching and they're seeing big businesses and small businesses, all sorts of innovation and technology coming through Arizona, and I think that's putting pressure on courts. Some are being brave and thinking about how can they replicate that. Others are being a bit more cautious and thinking about small scale sandboxes, and just allowing more variation in the types of professional that can practice some areas of law. That sounds like a great solution. I think experience around the world is it doesn't offer much. It can help on the margins, but it doesn't change much.
Any predictions on when the next biggest jurisdictions might come on board to participate in the
Yeah, it's
U.S.?
probably the question I get asked the most. I think if you'd asked me around the time Arizona was actually starting to license ABSs, I thought we would see Florida, and then California. But as I say, lawyer power stopped that. Um, I think lots are playing on the margins. I don't see anybody doing anything really radical, but I think increasingly it just doesn't matter. I think you've got Arizona, you've got the UK, you've got Australia, you've got other international jurisdictions thinking about this, and there's ways of structuring businesses and services delivery that mean you can, perfectly ethically, perfectly lawfully, achieve what businesses want to achieve across the US. Um, I, yeah, I'll let you go. Yeah.
Yeah, so on that, again, on that kind of, making it work in other jurisdictions, obviously people can kind of use co-counsel to obviously adhere to the regulations, and it just seems from more of an outsider perspective, is that the best that we can do here in the U.S. compared to obviously the blanket wide approval in the U.K., which kind of just opened the whole thing up and it was more suited for purpose. I mean, obviously different circumstances, but again, it just made it kind of a complete level playing field. Whereas in the U.S. we have this interesting patchwork condition.
Yeah, it is a patchwork in the US, and you need a little bit of imagination and creativity to make it work. But those ideas are spreading, and we're seeing more and more businesses operate nationally. Co-counsel, referral arrangements, the use of staffing lawyers. There's a number of things that can be done to build a really effective national practice based on a Arizona law firm, ABS. Um, And let's remember traditional law firms that they may be based in New York or any of the other big cities, and they're not saying I can't do that work in Idaho, and they're not saying I can't do that work in
Right.
Kansas. You know, they're finding ways within the rules of the framework, home state and destination state. They're finding ways of working, and an Arizona ABS is in no different a position. Absolutely confident that you can build a national business from a Arizona law firm.
While we're on Arizona, obviously, I think the first deal that's been done in Arizona was February 12th with Aprio as a Atlanta-based 25th largest accounting and consulting firm. Basically joined forces with Redix Law. Now, Aprio Legal, 15 attorneys, and making waves with that matter. Um, I assume, and then we also know of another major big law or big accounting firm has made waves last week actually, and kind of leading the way with big accounting in that state. Um, Curious, who's vulnerable here because of this taking place, Crispin? I'm curious to hear from you because I think, if I may, the biggest firms have this moat of bill rates and Fortune 10, Fortune 500 clients, global clients that are not that overly worried about bill rates. But it appears to me that this is about price competition, which could ultimately affect smaller firms or mid-size or like firms that average rates around 500 an hour, 600 an hour and down, and you have these consulting and accounting firms who know how to drive value and combine it with technology. Are those the most vulnerable
Um, yeah, we can think of it structurally like that, and I think in the long run we'll see the market changing. I'll come back to that. But start who's most vulnerable. Actually, I think it's really easy. I think the law firms and the providers that are vulnerable are the ones that don't deliver what their clients want.
Yeah,
And that can
sure.
be anybody in any structure. And you know, the key to that is to understand that what clients want changes. It changes because of
Hmm.
their own situation, but it also changes because they see other providers offering other things. So, you know, the firms that are most vulnerable are the firms that are looking inwards, not the firms that are looking outwards. You've got to be looking at what other people are doing. You've got to be close to your clients, but not complacent. So you've got to be finding out not just what do they want from you, but who else are they buying from? What else could you be doing to keep them happy? And if you get that mindset right, then I don't think anybody has to worry. But yeah, there is a structural change going on, and yeah, economics I think tells us that as markets mature, the middle gets hollowed out. People get very big, or people are small, niche, and bespoke. Technology drives that, globalization drives that, clients' demands drive that. So I think that's a real challenge for them. And I think people without access to capital are at risk. And I think that's why, in the end, ABS is such an important thing. If you can't invest in technology and you can't invest in a sustainable growth of scale or very smart small, then it's really hard to see how you can continue to innovate and be at the cutting edge of meeting changing client need.
And where do you see on that, again, if we kind of just switch to private equity for a moment, what are you experiencing, what are you seeing in the marketplace in the US in particular to private equity?
Yeah, investors are interested in the legal market. They're interested in professional services. They've seen um, over a long period of time, they've seen successful investments, I think, into health and increasingly into accounting. Uh, we see across the world, similar in the UK, in investment into accounting, some aspects of health, dental services, veterinary services, opticians, all different professions that are great at doing the core aspect of their professional work, but perhaps not so good at uh, business, innovation, technology. And they've learned how to do that as investors. They've learned the playbook for how to do that well, and perhaps sometimes along the way how to not do it so well. And they're interested in the legal industry. So as a last asset class that really is sort of underinvested, they see it as resilient, strong growth through the economic cycle. We say to people, if you want to understand growth in the legal industry in the world, I've got data going back to 1960 on the number of solicitors in England and Wales, and the only 2 years it fell, despite an oil crisis in the 70s and a recession, despite mass unemployment in the 80s, despite a global financial crisis, despite a pandemic, the only years it falls are when they cleaned the data and got rid of a few people that had died. Yeah, it is just relentless growth. The number of lawyers and the value of the legal market, and that's global. And investors see that as a huge opportunity with a strong moat. Despite liberalisation, it's hard to be good at delivering legal services. So it's just a really attractive asset class with strong margins, great resilience on pricing, and investors of all sorts are just really keen to get into the legal market and support it to grow more.
Are there other ways that private equity can get into the legal market in the United States, or is it only through Arizona? How is that looking?
There's lots of ways. There's lots of businesses that are working in parallel or on the margins or at the core, but in a different way of the legal market. We know all the alternative providers, Axiom, Elevate, Factor, Concilio, Lawyers on Demand, Epic, all of these different businesses, and most of them have private capital behind them.
Hmm.
They're certainly not owned by lawyers, which is why they've been able to invest in technology and growth and global reach and all of those different things. So we're already seeing it. We're seeing it also in technology. You know, people like Rocket Lawyer and LegalZoom, but more and more
Hmm.
small, new AI-driven technology. A company I work with called LawHive, which is a UK business, raised $40-50 million, coming to the US and looking to bring its expertise in technology and delivery of legal services. Yeah, so there's lots of ways that it's coming. But for traditional law firms, it's not so easy to go out and suddenly convert yourself into a technology business or an alternative provider. You can do bits of this on the margins. So how do they raise money? Well, private equity, private markets can invest in organizations parallel to law firms. And we've seen that in health and elsewhere. So you can have service companies alongside a law firm that provide captured services to that law firm, be it marketing, technology, back office services, varies by nature and type of law firm. And private equity can invest in that. They can invest on their own, or they can co-invest with the law firm partners. Structure, availability, and money, they're not the issues. The issue is, what would a law firm want to do with the money? Has it got a strategy for investment? And has it got the governance, the capability, and the capacity to execute that strategy? And I think for investors, that's what they're really looking for. They're investing in leadership. And has the leadership got control of this entity? And have they got a strategy that they're capable of executing?
Can I pick up on your point about, you mentioned that the structure may not be kind of a barrier when you're talking about private equity with traditional law firms. Is that the case? Because, law firms are peculiar organizations. Like, you have usually have a small number of people who are the rainmakers within a law firm. They have an outsized power structure because of that, because they're so important to the health of the direction of the business. And then private equity comes in saying, well, I want to pay you off. I want to get rid of you so I can actually take control of the business and change direction and increase profits further. It's a very hard discussion to have with people who are kind of owners and running the business currently.
Yeah, in my experience, they don't want to get rid of the people. They're rainmakers because they're good at what they do. They're good at bringing in work, and they're good at executing that work in a way that keeps clients happy. Private equity doesn't want to practice law, funnily enough. It's happy to leave that to the lawyers. They don't want to make legal widgets. They want to make money. That's their business. They want to partner with those people. And what makes the law firm investable is not just its numbers, but whether its culture's right, its governance right, its strategy right. So if the culture of that partnership is, what you and I have seen, I guess, a few times, a little bit old school, where there's not strong control of those that bring in the most money, well, it's probably not that investable a law firm. But if they've modernized their governance and they've got leaders that are expert at leadership and use expertise on strategy and execution and technology, then those businesses are very investable. And PE doesn't have to invest in all law firms. It just has to find the right law firm
ones
to invest in.
Right.
And they win in the long run because they'll be even better run with the expertise that PE brings in. It doesn't just bring money. It brings experience of doing whatever it is the strategy is. Roll-up technology, international expansion, parallel services, multidisciplinary services. They bring that expertise alongside the money. They don't just throw the money and walk away.
Also, it kind of fast forwards the whole succession planning within inside of a law firm once the money kind of comes onto the table. It's an interesting kind of dynamic because, as you know, law firms are not great at succession planning in the best of times.
Yeah, it's something they never used to think about. You go back to 50, 60 years in the UK, and on qualification as a lawyer, you became a partner. There wasn't a gap. It was a 5-7 year apprenticeship, and when you qualified, you became partner of the law firm. That changed in the late 60s and early 70s as law firms suddenly got scale, and they managed, I think, profit per equity partner, which is the metric, bizarrely, that they're all still addicted to. And they pushed partnership further and further away, and increasingly it's dangled as a carrot with a high failure rate along that journey. And I think that provides a real challenge on succession, and the partnership model is under pressure because in lots of firms, not all, I think you can still do that model really well, but for lots of firms it's under pressure, and the people coming through are saying, I don't want to take that journey to gamble that I might make partnership. I want something more sustainable. And equity ownership gives you that.
Yeah.
If you've got equity, you can give equity to trainee lawyers. You can give equity to your IT director, your receptionist, and they can all have a stake in the capital growth of the business, and that changes incentives.
Yeah, I think what you're referring like that traditionally it was the guild mentality,
Hmm.
right? So that's all changed now with the pressures on the business, with technology, with obviously private equity money. So the whole thing is changing beyond belief.
Yeah, and it's changing for lots of reasons in it. That's sustainability and succession planning, but also what you need money for and how much you need. Practice of law historically has not been capital intensive. Partners can put their own money in, and that's fine. But technology and scaling up to be alongside global clients
Technology
really changes.
compliance as
Yeah,
well.
absolutely.
That's yeah. So
Yeah, and partner capital's not even patient. They might not take it out, but they don't want to have to put a lot in.
Hmm.
And they want to distribute all of the profits every year. That's the model, and
Yep.
great model it's been for them. But if you want to invest in technology and growth, compliance, all of those different things, you need patient capital, and you need to move from maximizing annual cash profits and distribution towards an understanding of capital value of your business. And you need a different sort of capital. And if you need different capital, you need different investors. And if you need all of those things, you probably need a different sort of leadership as well.
I'd love to pivot back, Crispin, to the UK leading the way, and um, just realizing. So ABS started in 2012, based on a law.com article. Is that correct?
Yeah, the legislation came in 2007. There was some infrastructure stuff to do, but the first one
Okay.
was December 2011.
2011. Okay, great. And again, I'm referring to a law.com article that talks about how many licenses, maybe nearly 2,000, like 1,700 to 2,000 licenses in the UK.
Yeah, so it's approaching 20%, perhaps a bit more than that, of all law firms have some sort of non-lawyer ownership. Um, and that's every sort of law firm. That's a solo practitioner that's brought their husband or wife in, perhaps for tax reasons. It might be somebody higher up that's brought in their IT director or their finance director into ownership for incentives and alignment. Um, but it's also at the far end, it's firms that floated on the stock market, it's the big four, multidisciplinary practices, technology businesses, American law firms. Um, American law firms that would be ethical disasters if they did such a dangerous thing in their home country, funnily enough, are operating as ABS just over the pond out of sight.
Yeah, and so again, and even for our listeners to refer back to, I believe it was February 17th, an article, these American law firm, 100 firms are making their move towards ABSs in Europe, or England, it should say. And just to rattle off some names that was mentioned in the article, so Reed Smith, Wilson Sonsini, Alston Bird, Shepard Mullen, Crow Mooring, Haynes and Boone, Cahill Gordon, Vetter Price, all have received their UK ABS. Um, I mean, I was surprised. I mean, I heard rumors, but I didn't know it was this many. And I'm curious. Obviously, you can't speak to individual ones, but I'm curious how this is going to look in the next 5 to 10 years. Who else is going to get them? And, you know, I think they're kind of waiting to see what happens in the United States. But before then, are they going to take private capital and start doing things over there?
Yeah, I think people are positioning themselves to take whatever opportunities might come, give themselves maximum flexibility for the future, whether that's um, to use the UK as a base for reaching other jurisdictions or to bring money in to help a wider group of the law firm invest in technology. There's lots of things you can do if you've got a global structure. It's why it matters less that it's harder in the US because your clients are global and you've got a UK ABS. Well, you can do everything through there. Um, so there's lots of firms doing it. Have any of them done anything really radical yet? I don't think so particularly. The big four obviously practicing law in the UK and have been for 10 plus years. Um, that's quite significant. Um, but it'll happen gradually and something big will happen. There's a great Hemingway line about, from one character to another, how did you go bankrupt? And the guy replies, gradually and then suddenly.
Right.
Well, that's how change happens as well, and it's happening gradually at the moment, but suddenly we will just see events that are really seismic, um, and the legal market will change at pace, I suspect, for a while.
Yeah. And so these firms, hypothetically, could take some form of private equity in the UK, and that those resources can funnel to the US. There's is there a wall?
Yeah, yeah. There's definitely ways of doing that. There's some complex structures you need to put in place and governance, but you sometimes need that for traditional law firms as well, because being a lawyer in one jurisdiction doesn't mean you're recognised as a lawyer in another jurisdiction automatically. So there's some complexities around this, but that absolutely can be done. Um, you can bring money in from the UK and fund acquisitions that are global. You could fund technology investment, or you could just use it for working capital lent across the ocean into the US firm. There's lots of things you could do.
And then one other quick question I'll just ask is, what are some of those other additional challenges? Say U.S. firms are wanting to come to you and chat, like there's complexity, there's multiple jurisdictions. How are these firms are how are they helping the UK sign off on something like this and say, yes, you can consider this, or what's preventing them from doing that?
I think it's culture rather than anything else
Oh, it's
that holds
culture.
people back. I
Interesting.
don't I don't think it's anything else. You know, the regulator in the UK doesn't have a view on whether you've got a good business or not a good business. It's the market sorts that out. It's not saying we'll
Right.
give you a license because we think you'll be successful. They're giving you a license because you meet the conditions for a license.
Right.
Customers decide whether or not you're successful.
Yeah.
So the regulators, it's not like touch. It's got some pretty far-reaching powers, and it uses them if people are misbehaving. But it's trying to create a open market, not set any particular objectives for that market. It wants competition to drive the outcomes,
Yeah.
not the regulator or the state, which I think is the right approach. Um, I think lack of awareness, it's perhaps not all law firms in the US and still in the UK really understand the opportunities and how feasible it is to achieve some of the stuff that they want to. Might be because they're too insular. Um, I don't think they always are open to all of the ideas. If your way to the top of a law firm to be a decision maker is to start at the bottom and have 30 years of any sense of innovation hammered out of you, well, it's going to be tough when you get to the top of that law firm. And you're surrounded by other lawyers only. You're not surrounded by people that have grown up in even other businesses often, let alone other industries and other professions and other disciplines. So, all of that cultural stuff, I think, is a drag back to the 19th century. And, successful firms are starting to just cut those ties and look outwards and look forwards.
And on that point, Crispin, you mentioned previously about the challenge for firms is what to do with the money once they kind of raise the money. Have you seen examples of what firms, I mean, without naming names, obviously, but is there like besides the technology and the compliance and maybe some talent, what have firms done with the dollop of money that they've received to really supercharge their businesses going forward?
So technology is the obvious one. People invest in technology platforms that start to increase productivity and lower cost of delivery, or make pricing more predictable. We see it in marginal ways, knowledge management, how they time record, all sorts of different things can be part of that. And obviously now we're seeing it with the development of AI and large language models and agentic AI. We're seeing investment in that. But I think also we're seeing roll-up strategies. So law firms being funded to consolidate their part of the legal market. I think that might increase. I think we've seen that a lot in the UK. We've seen some people do it badly. We've seen some people do it really well. I think we'll see more of that. And I think we see money being used for international expansion as well. Again, it's about being able to deploy capital to do these things faster and to bring in the expertise that allows you to then do it safer and better. Take more risk because you better understand the risks.
Crispin, do you, as you're counseling clients in both sides of the pond, is IPO part of the conversation, or is it like a last resort for capital? Because I know the US has swung heavily towards private markets, and it's really a split capital markets environment here in the US where it's private and public markets. Curious how those conversations are happening for you.
Yeah, well, we've seen 8, 9, 10 firms, something like that, float on the stock market in the UK. I'm a bit hesitant about it. I'm not sure the law firm model, the speed of cash flow, the slowness of that, really fits with the cycle of, almost daily reporting that it feels like public companies have to do. But it can be right for people. I just think we haven't got the maturity in the investment into law firms for that to be the main route. So I think we will continue to see private market money come into law firms, often as a minority stake. And then as that's proven to be successful and firms get better at executing and using money and investors get increasingly confident in some of their investments, we will see that accelerate. And, once some bigger firms start to be majority owned by external investors, then I think we start to see a 3, 5, 7-year journey where some of that will be towards IPO. And I guess a bit like happened in investment banking, it just takes someone to lead this.
Yeah.
So, we might see that over the next 2, 3 years, I suspect, where somebody significant starts to take steps towards this, and it gives other people confidence.
Yeah. Yeah. So it's going to require some courage and vision.
Yeah.
Well, greatly appreciate your time, Crispin, your expertise. We really appreciate your insights. It's the hottest thing that's happening in the United States right now, aside from the big getting bigger and wealthier, is this. This is the elephant that everybody knows about now. And really appreciate that. Would love to entertain a thought of bringing you back on the show, maybe in a year or two, as more fireworks are taking off. So, but thank you so much. Crispin, how can people find you, contact you, maybe follow you on social media?
Yeah, good luck finding me on social media, but you can find me on LinkedIn, and you can find me at the Kingsley Napley or Stratify website. Just Google me.
Excellent. Crispin, thank you. It's been an honor and a pleasure.
Honor and a pleasure for me, and great to chat to you both. And look forward to coming
Crispin.
back.
Really appreciate it. Thank you.